She was crying. Not the polite kind, the ugly kind. Shoulders shaking, mascara running in dark lines down her cheeks. Standing in the middle of an Ottawa shopping center 3 weeks before Christmas. And I was the one who made it happen. The mall was packed. Christmas music playing on a loop overhead. Garland and lights wrapped around every railing. People rushing past with shopping bags and heavy winter coats. I was working a temporary stand near the main corridor, clipboard in hand. Photos of children on the display behind me. Child sponsorship season, the most emotionally charged time of the year. I've been talking to her for 15 minutes. Showed her the photos of the children we were trying to help. Told her about the village, the school we were building, the difference $39 a month could make. She was nodding. Her voice was getting thick. Her eyes were wet. Not from sadness, from connection. She wanted to help. I could feel it. And then I asked her to commit. Something shifted. Her eyes went wide, not with generosity, with panic. I just can't do this right now. She was stepping backwards, glancing towards the exit. I felt it in my chest, that familiarity tightening. The one that screams, "You're losing this. Do something." So I did something. The wrong thing. I pushed. But you said this mattered to you. You said you wanted to help these kids. Her face crumpled. I know what I said, but I can't, okay? I can't. And that's when the tears started. I stood there in that crowded corridor, shoppers flowing around us like we were a rock in a river, jingle bells playing somewhere overhead, a woman crying because I'd cornered her into guilt instead of guiding her through fear. I didn't lose that sale because she couldn't afford it. I lost it because when she hesitated, I panicked. And when I panicked, she felt it. My fear infected her. My desperation became her wall. If you've ever watched a deal slip away and couldn't explain why, this episode is for you. If you've ever said all the right things, but still heard, "Let me think about it," stay with me. Because what I learned after that moment in Ottawa changed everything. Not just about handling objections, about understanding what happens inside your own nervous system the moment someone pushes back.
Welcome to the Sales Evolution Lab, exploring the science of selling, from past wisdom to future innovation.
Welcome back. I'm Kyle Mackey, and last episode, we covered the pull, the 5 influence triggers that make people lean towards yes. Reciprocity, liking, social proof, authority, scarcity. If you haven't listened to that one, go back. It's the foundation. But today, we're dealing with something different. Today, we're dealing with the push. Because every time you pull, something pushes back. Fear, uncertainty, the biological need to protect oneself from making a mistake. Influence creates momentum towards yes. Objections are the friction that stops it. And until you understand that friction, until you learn how to work with it instead of against it, you'll keep losing deals you should have won. Now, here's something critical. If you listened to our episode on fanatical prospecting, you already met with the 3 responses that derail most interactions: reflexes, brush-offs, and objections. I'm not going to reteach that framework. What I'm going to do is show what actually happens neurologically when those responses hit. And more importantly, what to do about it. Because knowing the categories isn't enough. You need the tools to navigate each one without your biology betraying you. The book that organized this research is Jeb Blout's Objections. Blout didn't invent these principles, neither did I, but he documented them, gave them structure, named patterns I'd been feeling in my gut for years. When I read that book, I wasn't learning something new. I was just finally seeing the science behind what I'd already proven in the field. on gym floors in Ontario when I was 19, in shopping centers from Ottawa to Brisbane, knocking on doors in suburbs across New Zealand. The academic research confirmed what thousands of face-to-face conversations had already taught me. Objections aren't attacks, they're signals. And the salesperson who learns to read those signals stops fighting and starts guiding. By the end of this episode, you'll have 6 upgrades to your operating system. The discipline of asking, why most deals die in silence, never reaching the objection stage at all. The ledge, the single-second reset that stops your brain from betraying you when resistance hits. The turnaround, how to push past reflexes that aren't real decisions. The red herring filter, how to recognize tests designed to knock you off your game. The dissolution framework, 5 steps that turn hesitation into commitment without arguing. The obstacle immunity, the mindset that transforms rejections from a verdict into fuel. 6 frameworks, 6 ways to stop losing deals you should have won. Let's begin. Here's something that will either offend you or set you free. You're biologically designed to fail at handling objections. Not because you're weak, not because you lack skill, because you're human. Your ancestors survived by avoiding rejection. The caveman who got expelled from the tribe died alone in the wilderness. The cave woman, shunned by her community, lost protection for herself and her children. For thousands of generations, rejection wasn't just painful, it was deadly. And your brain still operates on that ancient programming. When a prospect says no, your amygdala doesn't distinguish between a lost sale and a predator attack. It fires the same alarm. It releases the same chemicals, triggers the same cascade of panic. Blood rushes away from your prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of your brain, and towards your muscles. Your body prepares to fight or run. And in that moment, your IQ literally drops. You're not thinking anymore. You're surviving. This pattern explains most of what goes wrong under pressure, why you say stupid things when the stakes are high, why you forget your training the moment you need it most, why you push when you should pause, why you cave when you should hold. It's not a character flaw. It's a biological hijack. Now, I've talked about failure patterns in salespeople. You've met them in previous episodes. Today, I want to show you what happens to those patterns when an objection lands. When someone retreats into information during an objection, they're not solving the problem. They're hiding from the emotion. The prospect didn't ask for more data. They asked for reassurance. When someone responds to resistance with intensity, they're widening the gap. The harder they push, the faster the prospect retreats. And the one that looks most professional is often the most damaging. When someone hears resistance and retreats into courtesy, they're not being respectful. They're abandoning someone who needs guidance. Of course, take your time. No pressure at all. They hand over the brochure, walk away telling themselves they're being professional. What they're actually doing is choosing their own comfort over their prospect's needs. I've been all 3 for longer than I'd like to admit, but these patterns can be broken. So let's start with the foundation. Here's a truth that will either convict you or liberate you. You cannot close a deal you don't ask for. Sounds obvious. It's not. Because asking doesn't mean hinting. It doesn't mean suggesting. It doesn't mean waiting for them to volunteer. It means looking someone in the eyes and saying, let's do this directly, confidently, without apology. I learned this lesson in a place that doesn't forgive hesitation, a gym floor at Movati Athletics in Ontario. I was 19 years old, terrified half the time, selling personal training to people who walked in with no plan to buy anything. One call closes, no second chances, no follow-up sequences, just you, them, and maybe 20 minutes to help them make a decision about their health. And I had this habit that was killing me. I'd do an entire consultation perfectly, build the connection, show them the program, paint the picture of their transformation, get them nodding along, excited, ready. And then I'd say something like, so, what do you think? What do you think? 4 words that handed all the power to them. 4 words that gave them permission to hesitate, 4 words that invited them, let me think about it, into the room. My manager pulled me into the back office after watching one of these consultations. The fluorescent lights above, the room smelled like protein powder and failed potential. Kyle, you just asked him for permission to fail. I didn't understand. You asked, what do you think? That's not a close. That's an invitation to escape. You might as well open the door and point it at his car. I felt the heat in my face, but I don't want to be pushy. Pushy is about energy, not words. You can be direct without being pushy, but you cannot be indirect and close deals. Pick one. That conversation taught me something that changed everything. The assumptive ask. Not a question, a statement. Instead of, what do you think? You say, based on what you've told me, let's get you started with the 3-month package. Then you stop talking. You don't add anything. You don't soften it. You don't give them an escape hatch. You make the statement and let silence do the work. That silence feels unbearable at first. 2 seconds feels like 2 hours. Your brain screams at you to fill the void, to backtrack, to offer an alternative, to say something, anything, to end that discomfort. But that discomfort is just your amygdala trying to escape. And if you escape, so does the prospect. The first person to speak after an assumptive ask loses. Learn to sit in that silence. It's where deals are decided. Now, if you stopped here, you'd already be ahead of most salespeople. Just learning to ask directly and then shut up would change your numbers. But there's a trap that catches even the people who master this skill. Because once you ask, once you finally have the courage to make the statement and hold the silence, they respond. And sometimes that response is resistance. And in that moment, that fraction of a second between hearing no and reacting, your biology will try to betray you, unless you have a tool to stop it. Here's your action from this lesson. Before your next sale conversation, write down the exact words you're going to use to ask for the commitment. Not a question, a statement. Let's get you started. Let's move forward with this. Based off everything you've shared, the next step is write it down, say it aloud, practice it until the words feel natural in your mouth. Because if you don't plan the ask, you'll default to, so what do you think? And that question has cost more salespeople more money than any objection ever has. The discipline of asking gets you into the game. But staying in the game when resistance hits, that requires something else completely. A tool that operates faster than your biology. A technique that fires before your brain has time to panic. The tool has a name, and it might be the most important single-second skill you'll ever develop. Let me take you to a boardroom in downtown Ottawa. February, snow piling against the windows. The kind of cold that seeps through glasses and settles into your bones. I was in my early 20s, pitching group fitness programs to corporate clients, workplace fitness classes designed to reduce sick days and improve retention. And the man across the table was the VP of Human Resources for a company with 300 employees. This was one of my biggest pitches of my young career. The room smelled like old coffee and expensive furniture, and I could hear the HVAC rattling through the vents. My mouth tasted like metallic edge of adrenaline. I'd prepared for weeks, built rapport over 2 previous meetings, demonstrated the ROI, connected the program to their retention problems. He was nodding. His assistant was taking notes. I felt the momentum. Everything was aligned. I asked for the commitment. His face shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. His eyebrows drew together. His jaw tightened by a fraction. Kyle, I appreciate everything you've shown us, but we've tried fitness programs before. They just don't work. Our people sign up, come for a month, and then engagement drops off completely. I felt it happen in real time. The surge, the heat flooding my chest, thoughts accelerating, my brain screaming, argue, defend, show them the data that proves this is different. I opened my mouth, and out came the worst possible response. But no, wait, our program actually tracks participation, and He was already shaking his head before I finished the sentence. His arms crossed, his body language closed. I'd lost him. Not because my argument was wrong, because I argued at all. Here's what I didn't understand back then. When someone raises an objection, they're not asking for a debate. They're expressing fear. Fear of making a mistake, fear of looking foolish, fear of wasting money, fear of being the person who champions something that fails. And when you respond to fear with logic, you don't eliminate fear. You validate it. You confirm that this is a battlefield where someone wins and someone loses. And nobody wants to be on the losing side of an argument about their own judgment. The tool I was missing that day is called the ledge. It's a memorized automatic response that you deploy the instant an objection lands. Not to answer the objection, to buy yourself time. To interrupt the amygdala hijack before it completes. To keep your logical brain online for the conversation that actually matters. The ledge is simple. When they push back, you respond with a neutral phrase. That makes sense. I appreciate you sharing that. That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. I figured you might feel that way. That's it. 4 or 5 words, said calmly, without defensiveness, without arguing, without any indication that you're about to fight back. What happens next is remarkable. First, you buy yourself 1 to 2 seconds. That doesn't sound like much, but in those seconds, your amygdala begins to calm. Blood flows back to your prefrontal cortex. Your IQ comes back online. You can actually think again. Second, you signal to the prospect that you're not threatened. Most salespeople visibly react when they hear an objection. Their face tightens, their posture shifts, their energy spikes. The prospect sees this and thinks, I hit a nerve. There must be something wrong with this deal. But when you respond with calm acknowledgement, you send a different signal. You communicate. This is normal. This is expected. We can handle this together. Third, you avoid the fatal mistake of psychological reactance. There's a principle in psychology. When people feel their freedom or autonomy is threatened, they resist. The harder you push, the harder they push back. When you argue with an objection, the prospect's brain perceives an attack on their judgment. They double down. The ledge sidesteps this entirely. By acknowledging their concern without fighting it, you give them permission to hear what comes next. Let me show you what that Ottawa conversation could have looked like. When he said, we've tried fitness programs before, they don't work. Instead of arguing, I respond, that makes total sense. Most workplace fitness programs fail. Now watch what happens. His eyebrows lift slightly. He wasn't expecting agreement. His arms uncross. His posture softens. He's curious now instead of defensive. From there, I can actually have a conversation. What do you think causes the previous programs to fail? Now he's talking. Now he's diagnosing the problem with me instead of defending against me. Now we're on the same side. Here's your action from this lesson. Pick your ledge phrase. Write it down. That makes sense. I appreciate you saying that. I figured you might feel that way. Whatever feels natural to you, then practice it. Not when you're under pressure, before you're under pressure. Say it out loud 100 times. Say it until it's automatic, until your mouth can deliver it before your brain has time to panic. Because when the objection lands, you won't have time to think. You'll have a quarter second. And in that quarter second, your ledge needs to fire without conscious effort. The ledge keeps you in the game. But staying in the game isn't enough. You need to know what to do next. And that depends entirely what kind of resistance you're facing. Not all no's are the same. Some aren't even real decisions. They're reflexes, automatic responses that fire before conscious thought can intervene. And treating a reflex like a genuine objection is one of the most expensive mistakes in sales. Who walks into an office supply store just to browse? Nobody. You go in for staples or printer paper or a specific cable. But when the clerk asks, can I help you? What do you say? Just looking. That's not a decision. That's a reflex. And if you're treating reflexes like rejection, you're leaving deals everywhere. Jeb Blount tells a story about this exact moment. He walked into an office supply store, needed an iPad cord, specific item, clear purpose. The clerk asked, can I help you? And out of his mouth came, "Just looking." Then he caught himself. Wait, who browses office supply stores? Nobody. He needed help, but his brain fired with reflex before his conscious mind could intervene. This happens in sales constantly. Someone says, "I'm not interested," before you've said 3 sentences. Someone says, "We're all set," before you've explained what you're offering. Someone says, "Now's not a good time," while clearly standing in their doorway doing nothing. These aren't decisions. They're reflexes, automatic responses programmed by years of being interrupted by salespeople. Now, in episode 3, we covered the distinction between reflexes, brush-offs, and true objections in depth. We also covered what Blount calls the RBO turnaround: anchor, disrupt, ask. I'm bringing that framework back today, not because it's new, but because when objections hit, this is the moment most salespeople fall apart. Same framework, higher stakes. The turnaround works in 3 steps: ledge, disrupt, ask. If you listen to episode 3, you'll recognize this as the same structure with one upgrade. The ledge replaces what Blount calls the anchor. Same function, buying your brain time to recover. First, the ledge. When they push back, you respond with calm acknowledgement. I figured you'd say that. That makes sense. I hear that a lot. This interrupts your own panic response and signals to them that you're not rattled. Second, you disrupt. This is where you break the pattern. They're expecting 1 or 2 things. Either you'll argue with their brush-offs or you'll surrender and leave. You do neither. You say something that creates a moment of cognitive interruption, something they weren't expecting. That's exactly why I called. Most people feel that way until they see what we've been able to do for other companies just like yours. I figured you might say that. That's actually the number 1 response I get right before people realize this could save them 6 figures. Third, you need to ask. You immediately follow the disruption with a specific low commitment request. Can I have 5 minutes to show you why? Would you be open to a quick conversation next Tuesday? Don't ask permission to continue the current conversation. Ask for a specific next step. Let me show you how this worked in practice. I was training fundraisers in Auckland. One of them, a guy named Marcus, was struggling with doors. He'd approach, give his opening, and the moment someone said, "Not interested," he'd thank them and leave. His numbers were terrible. He was ready to quit. I went out with him one afternoon, watched him work. First door, not interested. He smiled, thanked him, walked away. Second door, we're busy. Same thing. Third door, we already give. Same polite retreat. I pulled him aside. "Marcus, you're accepting reflexes as rejection." He looked confused. They said they're not interested. They said words that sounded like rejection. But they didn't actually reject anything because they don't know what you're offering yet. So we practiced the turnaround. Next door, woman in her 50s, cautious expression. Marcus gave his opening. She said, "Not today." Old Marcus would have thanked her and walked away. New Marcus used the ledge. I totally understand. I hear that a lot, actually. Then the disrupt, which is interesting because the people who say that first usually end up being the most generous once they hear what we're doing. Her eyebrows lifted. The pattern broke. He had her attention. Then they ask, "Can I just take 2 minutes to show you why?" She paused, then stepped aside. Okay, 2 minutes. That conversation turned into a monthly donor. Ledge, disrupt, ask. Simple framework, powerful results. But not every challenge is a reflex. Some challenges aren't brush-offs at all. They're tests designed to knock you off balance, designed to derail your entire meeting before you even deliver your value. And if you don't recognize them for what they are, you'll chase the wrong conversation and lose the sale. Let me tell you about Derek. He was a software rep. Good product, strong preparation. Meeting with a decision maker at a mid-sized company. Everything looked promising. He walked into the conference room, shook hands, started setting up his laptop for the demo. Before he could get the first slide loaded, the executive leaned back and said, Before we get into all of that, just tell me, what is this going to cost? Derek felt the pressure. The room suddenly felt smaller. The executive was staring at him, waiting. Now, in that moment, Derek had a couple of choices. He could recognize this was just a test, a challenge designed to see how he'd respond, a way for the executive to establish control of the room. Or he could take the bait. Derek took the bait. He started explaining the pricing, but the pricing had complexity, professional service fee, implementation costs, licensing tiers. He got defensive about the professional service fee, started trying to hide it, started backpedaling. The executive smelled blood. So you're saying there are hidden fees? No. They're not hidden. They're just, how much are we really talking about here? And the next 30 minutes were an argument about pricing. The demo never happened. The value was never demonstrated. The meeting ended with, send me the detailed pricing and I'll get back to you. That was the last Derek ever heard from them. That pricing question wasn't a real objection. It was a red herring, a distraction thrown out to test the salesperson, to see if they'd lose control of the meeting, to establish who was running the conversation. And Derek failed the test. Red herrings come in many forms. What's your price? Who else are you working with? Can you give me a quick overview of your competitors? I heard there were some issues with your last implementation. These questions have one thing in common. They're designed to derail you. And if you engage with them directly, you've already lost. The framework for handling red herrings is called PAISE. Pause, acknowledge, ignore, save. First, pause. Don't respond immediately. Take a breath. This stops your amygdala from firing a reactive response. Second, you need to acknowledge. Let them know you heard them. That's a fair question. I appreciate you bringing that up. You're not answering the question. You're simply acknowledging that they spoke. Third, ignore. You don't answer the red herring. You redirect back to your agenda. What I'd like to do is walk you through how this works first. That way, when we do talk about pricing, you'll have the context to evaluate whether it makes sense for your situation. Fourth, save. Write down the red herring, literally, and say, I'm going to write that down so we don't forget to cover it. This shows the prospect that their concern matters to you, and it gives you control over when that conversation happens. Here's what often happens. By the time you deliver your value, by the time they've seen the demo, the red herring often disappears. Either they forget about it entirely, or the answer becomes obvious from the presentation. The prospect threw it out to test you. Once you pass the test, the question lost its power. I experienced this repeatedly in fundraising. People would say, I've heard some charities take 90% of the overhead. How do I know that money actually gets there? And that's a valid concern, but it's a red herring when it's thrown out at you before you even explained what you're raising money for. They're testing whether you'll get defensive. Old me would have taken the bait. I'd launch into defensive explanations about accounting and auditing. I'd lose them. New me recognizes the red herring. That's a really important concern. Let me show you something first that I think will give you some context. Then I continue with my presentation. When I get to the part about impact, I naturally address their concern, but on my terms, from a position of strength instead of defense. Here's your action from this lesson. Before your next important meeting, write down the 3 most likely red herrings you might face. And for each one, prepare your PAISE response. How will you pause? What acknowledgement will you use? How will you redirect back to your agenda? Because when the red herring comes, and it will, you need to recognize it instantly. The moment you take the bait, you've handed control to the prospect. But let's say you've navigated the red herring, you've delivered your value, you've asked for the commitment, and now they raise a genuine objection, a real concern, something that needs to be addressed, not ignored. What then? That's when you need a different framework entirely. Here's what most salespeople get wrong about the moment of commitment. They treat it like a debate. The prospect raises a concern, the salesperson counters with an argument. The prospect doubles down, the salesperson pushes harder. And even if the salesperson wins the argument, they lose the sale because nobody wants to buy from someone who just made them feel wrong. This is psychological reactance in action. When people feel their autonomy is threatened, they resist. The harder you push, the harder they push back. Their brain perceives your pressure as an attack, and attacked brains don't make buying decisions. They make defensive decisions. The framework that changes everything has 5 steps. Relate, isolate, clarify, minimize, ask. RICMA. First, you relate. When they raise an objection, your first job is to make them feel heard, not to fix, not to counter, to hear. I completely understand why you'd feel that way. That's a concern I hear from people in your exact situation. This isn't manipulation, it's empathy. When people feel understood, their walls come down. Second, you isolate. You need to know if this objection is the only barrier or one of many. If we could address this concern, is there anything else standing between us moving forward? This prevents the moving goalpost problem, where they raise one objection, you address it, and then they raise another. Often, the stated objection isn't the real objection. Isolation helps you find the truth. Third is clarify. Don't assume you understand what they mean. Help me understand what you mean by that. When you say the price is too high, compared to what? Sometimes it's too expensive means I just don't have the budget. Sometimes it means I don't see the value. Sometimes it means I'm scared to make this decision. Each of those requires a completely different response. Fourth, minimize. You're not arguing against their concern. You're helping them see it in proportion. You're placing it next to a bigger pain or a larger opportunity. Blout tells a story about a prospect named Jim. Jim was losing $63,000 a year with his current vendor. He knew he needed to switch, but then he discovered his current vendor would charge a $10,000 exit fee. That fee became his objection. I can't justify paying $10,000 just to leave. Blout minimized by reframing. Jim, I hear you. That fee stings, but you're losing $63,000 a year staying where you are. Even if you pay the $10,000 to leave, you're still saving $53,000 in year 1 alone. Jim paused. The objection didn't disappear, but it shrunk. It became a speed bump instead of a roadblock. The key to minimization is using the prospect's own pain against their hesitation. You're not introducing a new argument, you're reminding them of what they've already told you. Minimization isn't manipulation, it's helping them see clearly. And then fifth, you ask. You've related, you've isolated, you've clarified, you've minimized. Now you ask again. Given all that, does it make sense to move forward? This is not the place for weakness. This is the place for calm, direct confidence. You've done the work. Now you give them the opportunity to say yes. I used this framework during a conversation that could have gone very wrong, knocking on doors in a suburb outside of Auckland. A man in his 40s had listened to my entire presentation about the children we were helping, was clearly moved, then said, I'd love to help, but I just got laid off 2 weeks ago. I can't commit to anything monthly right now. Old me would have accepted that at face value, thanked him, moved on. New me recognized a genuine objection that needed the full framework. Relate. I completely understand that must be incredibly stressful. Isolate. If your situation were different, if you had income right now, is this something you'd want to be part of? He nodded. Absolutely. These kids deserve a chance. Clarify. Honestly, if it was small enough that I wouldn't notice it even on my tight budget right now, minimize. You mentioned earlier you grab a coffee from the cafe down the road most days. Would you notice $39 a month? That's about $1 a day. He paused. Given that, does it make sense to get started today? He signed. Not because I pressured him, because I helped him see that his objection, while real, didn't have to stop him from doing something he genuinely wanted to do. Here's your action from this lesson. After your next sales conversation, when you face an objection, write down what happened. Did you relate? Did you isolate? Did you clarify? Did you minimize? Did you ask again? Grade yourself. RICMA forces you to slow down, to respond with alignment instead of opposition. But there's one more piece of this puzzle. You can master every framework in this episode. You can perfect the ledge. You can execute RICMA flawlessly, and you'll still face rejection. Lots of it. The question is, what happens to you when rejection lands? Stephen King was 14 years old when he hammered a nail into the bedroom wall, not to hang a poster, to hold his rejection letters. By 16, that nail couldn't support the weight. He replaced it with a spike and kept writing. That spike represents something that most people never understand. Success is paid for in advance, and the currency is rejection. King kept writing. Year after year, the spike filled. He became a teacher, got married, had kids, lived in a double-wide trailer, sometimes couldn't afford medicine, and he still wrote. One afternoon, while grading papers at school, someone told him he had a phone call. He walked to the office. His wife was there, holding a telegram. Carrie had sold. That spike of rejections wasn't evidence of failure. It was the price of admission. There's a concept called obstacle immunity. It's the mental callus that forms when you voluntarily expose yourself to rejection over and over again. The first no hurts. The 10th no stings. The 100th no barely registers. And somewhere past that, something shifts. Rejection stops being a thing that happens to you. It becomes data you collect. It becomes fuel you burn. Shaquem Griffin understood this. Born with a birth defect that required amputation of his left hand at age 4. His twin brother, Shaquille, was a star football recruit. Nobody wanted Shaquem. He spent a season on the scout team during an 0-12 losing record. Rejection was his daily reality. Then a new coach arrived who saw grit where others saw disability. Under Scott Frost's leadership, Shaquem helped lead UCF to an undefeated season and a Peach Bowl victory, named Defensive Player of the Year. The rejection wasn't a verdict. It was someone else's limitation projected onto him. In sales, you'll be told your price is too high. Doors will close in your face. Emails will go unanswered. None of it defines you. What matters is whether you keep going. Yes has a number. It might be 5. It might be 53. Most salespeople quit after 3 attempts. Here's your action from this lesson. Get yourself an index card. Write one word on it. Next. Put it somewhere you can see it. Every time you get rejected, look at the card. Say the word out loud. Next. Track your rejections. When you hit 50, acknowledge it. When you hit 100, recognize that you've paid the price most people won't pay. Your spike is waiting. Now fill it. Now, we've gone over 6 tools. Tools that you will take into your next conversation. Let's start with tool number 1, the assumptive ask. State what comes next. Let's get you started. Then shut up. Before every meeting, write your ask, word for word. Tool number 2, the ledge. When resistance hits, respond with neutral acknowledgement. That makes sense. Pause and breathe. Pick your phrase. Say it 100 times until it's automatic. Tool number 3, the turnaround. Ledge, disrupt, ask. I hear that a lot. That's actually why I called. Can I have 5 minutes? Write 3 disrupt statements before every prospecting block. Tool 4, PAIS, pays. Pause, acknowledge, ignore, save. When a red herring lands, don't chase it. Before every meeting, identify 3 most likely red herrings. Tool 5, RICMA, relate, isolate, clarify, minimize, ask. After every objection, grade yourself on all 5 steps. And tool 6, the next card, get rejected. look at the card, say next out loud, move on, keep count, celebrate milestones. So here's your pre-conversation checklist. What's my assumptive ask? What's my ledge phrase? What disrupt statements do I have ready? What red herrings might come? Am I prepared to use RICMA? Have I accepted that rejection is fuel? 6 questions. Every meeting, that's the toolkit. Now, at the start of this episode, I told you about a woman crying in an Ottawa shopping center. She wanted to help. She was ready to say yes. Until I panicked. Until my fear infected her. Until my desperation became her wall. If I could go back to that moment now, I'd use the ledge. I understand that's a big decision. I'd let her breathe. I'd ask, what would make this feel right for you? And I'd help her find her own path. The goal was never to pressure her into something she didn't want. The goal was to help her past the fear that was blocking what she did want. These frameworks can be used to manipulate, or they can be used to guide people through fear. The choice is yours. Every great salesperson I've known has a spike on their wall, and your spike is waiting. If this resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. This has been the Sales Evolution Lab podcast, where we explore the science of selling from past wisdom to future innovation. I'm Kyle Mackey, and I'll see you in the next episode.